Hello, my name is Marianne Neihart, and I'm the host of tonight's episode of Footprints in Pacifica. We get together every week to discover and explore the look, the lore, the history of Pacifica, its character and its characters. Tonight we're going to focus on a continuation of what we started last month, and that's the history of wastewater treatment in Pacifica. I have joining me tonight in our studio, again, Scott Holmes, who's our former Director of Public Works and was here for the development of the Calera Creek wastewater treatment plant, as well as a special guest, our former Mayor, Cal Hinton. Cal, welcome to both of you tonight, but I'm going to start with you. I want to ask you about, when we were in the last episode, we kind of ended with this problem, this challenge, if you will, at the Sharp Park plant, where we had gotten everything to that plant and then faced an overflow of too much sewage. So in the winter, when we got extra water, we would just not be able to handle it. I'm understanding that you were the first person to chair the committee that was really the Citizens Advisory Committee for that. I think you saw it through the whole process, correct?
Yes, I did. And in fact, not only the first, but I was stuck with it all through the process. In 2 minutes, I'll try to cover the several years that it took. We obviously needed a new plant, and the council decided to ask the citizens, as they should, what they thought and get their input. So they developed a committee. And on my appointment letter was March 1st, 1991. We formed a committee. We met several times. There were people on both sides of the issue. Many people wanted us to continue operating the existing plant and rebuild it. And so we had to get professional help. We had an EIR. There were 3 sites. One was the old wastewater treatment plant, the one in the quarry, and one in the golf course near the archery, before the archery range. Those were the final selections. And the EIR and the consulting engineer, a value engineering group, determined, I believe it was value engineering, these terms are kind of vague, it's been 20 years. And they decided that the quarry location was the best site for the wastewater treatment plant for numerous reasons. We interviewed the engineers, the consultants, and everyone that took part in that process. You have the manuals there that were developed.
Well, Cal, I was just going to ask you about that. So I have some of the manuals here. This is some of the paper, just laying it out here on the table, that this committee and ultimately the consultants generated related to picking the site. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And that's only a small portion. I kept all of those. I'm one of those saver types. I might need it sometime. And I had a stack at my house as high as this table, and I'm not exaggerating. I finally recycled them. In fact, the scavenger company got a boost in the recycling.
You know, that actually was just developed by the committee. It's not the consultant.
This was just the committee.
Yes, yeah. There were actually 5 of these documents that,
and there were
you
more,
have 3
so
of them there.
They
got bigger progressively as you get to the 5th one.
I did have a stack of the manuals
So
at the end.
The bottom line I wanted to show the public was that you really spent a great deal of time
Yes, we did.
sorting this out and working on the sites. And I understand you looked at more than just 3 sites to begin with.
Yes.
But then narrowed it down to those 3.
On the advice of the consultants.
Okay. So
it was about 50 initially.
What were the pros and cons of those sites?
Well, obviously availability and location, isolation, the ability to meet the discharge requirements. But we just took any suggestion that people had and looked at it. And I think we narrowed it down to 10 and then fine-tuned it with a value engineering consultant down to 3. And they also prepared cost estimates, and it showed the cost fairly comparable with the quarry being the cheapest alternative.
We would, if I may, meet almost weekly. And we went at the lunchroom of the old wastewater treatment plant, and we had some contentious meetings. People were very unhappy.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, Cal. So kind of, can you summarize sort of the sides in this?
Well, they felt that Mrs. Gotelli was a leader And the opposition, she, and certainly with a certain amount of merit, felt that the old wastewater treatment plant was the most viable approach, cost effective. But the difficulty with that is we have to keep the sewage flowing. And what do we do with it while we're rebuilding that plant? It's one of the considerations. They made some very good arguments, and people in the neighborhood didn't want it in their neighborhood, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
It's not the most desirable thing. It's not something you advertise in the paper, say, my house is near the sewer treatment plant.
Well, on the other hand, being one of those neighbors, in all fairness, so the people in our audience will understand that, it wasn't just that. It was the issue of moving from a secondary system with an ocean outfall to actually a tertiary treatment system.
Absolutely.
Yes. Scott, could you talk just a little bit about making those choices, what the differences were?
Yeah, the secondary is only acceptable for an ocean outfall, and we had 5 ocean outfalls that all had failed at one point or another. And the latest estimate for a new outfall was $20 million. So that was a big factor in terms of the cost and upgrades. So we looked at alternatives that would be cheaper that also would generate a resource rather than just a discharge to the ocean. The resource being recycled water and also a reusable sludge too, which was part of the
Now,
factor.
in these sort of factions that set up, these sides, there were a lot of public meetings.
Yes.
And a number of council meetings that happened, yes?
Yes.
A citizens group, Pacificans United for Positive Solutions, actually formed, and I think I recall there was one evening, there was you were at all those council meetings, there were 180 people in the audience. So this is a pretty tough decision.
Yes, it was, and it had to be based on the merits and the cost, and these people all had legitimate concerns, and they were very sincere about their concerns. They were just not those people who say, not in my backyard. They had, as I say, brought forward legitimate reasons for not putting it in different areas, and everyone had an opinion.
Well, ultimately,
excuse me.
That's okay. Ultimately, we settled on Clara Creek.
Yes.
And so the tertiary treatment plant and a new plant instead of a rehab plant became the solution. Scott, would you kind of walk me?
It was a far superior treatment process, and we even had someone concerned about historical Indian remains in that area.
Yes, I remember that. I wanted to take people through, before we look at the plant, because we're going to have a tour from our current operator tonight, I wanted to look at a couple of the kind of process issues in terms of development. Scott, could you just show us here where we're at?
Okay. Well, this is an early picture, probably 96 or in that range, but that shows the beginning of the excavation. The pad for the plant is right here, and the beginning of the construction of the wetlands, which was a restoration that was really the source of where the recycled water would go. And here's the old stream. The old stream was a 10-foot wide, 4-foot deep ditch. The new wetlands is almost 200 feet wide in some areas. And
so we're going to have some pictures of that in a little bit. But just before we go to the new plant, could we show the audience here on this larger version where Clara Creek actually existed and where the new site, because this is the site before we built Clara Creek.
And here's actually the ditch, which was, Clara Creek was channelized in 1980 and moved into that ditch. Before it was a larger riparian zone. And the plant is built up in this corner, and the new creek actually follows the edge of the hillside over here, and it's quite a bit wider and closer to what was there historically before the quarry.
And this is the old quarry site itself.
Yes.
And as you can see, this road comes in, and there was a time that it was intended to connect to Rockaway. Is that not true?
Well, that actually is, you can see the traces of the old county road that did connect to Rockaway. And this happened to be that portion of the road was just fixed up as a quarry access road. But it is the old county road is where that's located.
Well, here's an example of what we ended up with, and we're going to take you to the Clara Creek wastewater treatment plant. I'm just showing this picture to give you an idea of the outside. We're going to be starting with Dave Grom, who is currently running the plant and currently our Director of Public Works, in the next segment that we're going to show you right now, a little tour of that plant. I'm here at the new Calera Creek wastewater treatment plant. I guess it's not new now, is it?
It's about 10 years old now.
Oh my goodness. So it came online?
In September of 2000.
Okay. Could you tell me just a little bit, in kind of layman's terms, the difference between the Sharp Park plant and this plant?
Well, the Sharp Park plant was a flow-through plant, which means water goes in one end and comes out the other end, and it flows, and it never stops. This plant is a batch plant, and what that means is the main process that treats the water is sequencing batch reactors, and sequencing batch reactors, as the name applies, are a batch system. So we have 5 batch reactors which we're standing on right now.
We are.
Yeah, and the batch reactors, there's out of these 5 batch reactors, there's one always filling. So they're not all filling. Each one of them are doing different things. So the one that's filling, it goes through a fill process. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But before that, the tank is in idle position. It has about 15 feet of water in it. And then 10 feet of that water is microorganisms.
Oh,
so
okay.
These guys are waiting there to do their job. They're ready to
break
consume
down.
to consume the waste.
Okay.
And so they're waiting. So then the computer says, "Okay, it's your turn." So it opens up the valve and it starts filling. So it puts in 5 feet of water, of raw sewage, and that brings it up to 20-foot water level. The computer senses that, shuts the valve off, and starts filling another one. So then going back to that tank that just filled, now it goes into what we call react period, where it turns a pump on and it mixes it. The mixing is to give the organisms a vehicle to move around so they can come in contact with the waste. And then we also add air to give them air, because as they're consuming the waste, they need to use air just like we do. And they use a lot of air when they're consuming this waste.
So you have 5 of those tanks here.
Yes.
And the capacity then is?
Our capacity really is a huge range. We treat, right now our current daily average flow is 2.8 million gallons per day.
That's low.
But we can treat up to 20 MGD flow rates to accommodate the high I&I problems that we have around here.
Now, we've talked about this in the episode already, but that's when the water comes into the sewer lines,
Right.
and we get a whole lot of water in the winter with some of the rainstorms. So you can handle really upwards of 20 million gallons a day. They keep calling it MGD, but we're trying to get you to talk to them.
All right. So yes, and it can. And actually, this plant, the engineers designed it for 20 MGD, and I've seen it handle more than that.
That's
it does
right.
handle more than that.
So let me ask this. When you go out here, this is the outflow basically.
Correct.
What we put in Calera Creek is what?
It's tertiary quality water.
Tell
which
us what that means.
The old plant was secondary treatment, and secondary treatment effluent. You look at it, you can see visual solids still in there. It's not real clean. It's, you can put that out in the ocean in the distance, and it won't cause any negative effects, so they say. So.
Well, they are talking about, when we talk about they for us, we're sort of talking about San Francisco, right?
Well, San Francisco secondary treatment.
Yes. So they have a very long outflow,
Right.
from what I understand, an outfall pipe.
Right.
And so it goes way out there, and it's supposed to dilute in the ocean.
Right.
But ours goes in the creek.
Ours goes in the creek, and it's a shallow little creek. And during this time of the year, at the end of summer, we're the primary flow.
Yeah.
So our water has to be really, really good. And we've done a lot of testing on the creek before us, and we've done it after us. And we have clearly showed years of testing that we actually clean the creek up with our effluent.
So Dave, we were just talking about how this plant works. I'd like to know a little bit more about what we're standing underneath, because this looks like some pretty impressive solar panels.
Yeah. Well, we're standing right in the middle of the solar array. This is a 300 kW solar array. And this particular system here is a tracking
KW. Kilowatts?
Kilowatts.
Okay.
Sorry. The solar panels here, this is a tracking system. So it literally tracks the sun. So when you have a fixed solar system, it produces its peak power at noontime when the sun's the highest in the sky. So it starts out low, producing power, and then it produces its maximum power at noontime, and then it starts going down immediately. This system here, because it tracks the sun, so in the morning these panels will be facing out that way when the sun comes up. And at 9 o'clock in the morning it'll be putting out its maximum power, and it'll stay up there and it'll run along flat until about 4 o'clock, and then it starts to drop.
Wow.
So it produces a lot more power than a fixed system.
So what you were telling me earlier is that the treatment plant really does consume a lot of energy.
Yeah, treatment plants traditionally consume a lot of energy. This one consumes a lot of energy. One reason is because of the UV system. We use ultraviolet light to disinfect the water. Most treatment plants use chlorine, and then you have to use another harsh chemical to get rid of the chlorine. And you end up with chemical byproducts.
Oh,
because
yeah.
we discharge into a creek and we have endangered species down there, we can't discharge those kind of chemicals.
You basically have to have potable water.
We
there.
have to have, really high quality water.
So consequently, that uses a ton of energy. And this is placed to offset some of that,
This offsets about 15%.
about 15%. You were talking a little bit about maybe changing the system a bit.
Well, the UV system, when we bought that system, we bought the system in '95. But at that point, that was the state-of-the-art system to have. That was
Yeah.
the one to have. And now it's pretty much obsolete.
Already.
Already. That's the way it works in treatment plants. All the equipment becomes obsolete very quickly. So now they have much more energy efficient systems out there.
Good.
And so it's an exciting project that we're about to bring forward here. And we're having an engineering report done right now to show us what kind of energy savings we can have. But we are currently using our energy costs for just the UV system a year costs $450,000 a year.
Wow.
And the new UV system, this is preliminary right now because we're waiting for the engineering report, but it looks like it could come in under $200,000 a year.
And see, when these panels were first put up, with the rates being lower, we offset a great deal of that, right?
We did, but now PG&E has increased their charges, and so yeah, we're kind of back to
So
square
we're
one
staying
again.
on top of it.
We're just
That's
keeping
great.
our heads above. So this next project is really going to put a dent in.
Okay.
So that'll be exciting.
We were talking about the mechanisms of the Sharp Park plant and how that was so much more exposed to the ocean. Could you say just a little bit about that?
Yes, I worked there when they first started up the secondary part of the plant. That was brand new back in late 70s. And I started work there. And it was an incredible corrosion area. And that plant was deteriorating so quickly. It was amazing. And I thought we were going to have that same problem here. But because we have this mountain in between us, it gives us so much more protection. It's amazing. We don't have the rust like they do over there.
So things last longer. Our last episode of Footprints, Scott Holmes was talking about how the plant at that point in time sort of was producing solids. Speaking of solids, isn't that where we're going right now?
That's correct.
Well, let's come on inside and take a look at the sludge room. Is that what this is?
Sludge processing room.
The sludge processing room. If we can get the door open. There we go. Okay. Scott, we're inside. I just want, as our audience looks at this, for you to tell them what they're looking at, if you could.
Okay, well that right there is a belt thickener, which thickens the sludge that's taken out of the batch reactors before it goes to the digesters. And it thickens it up so the digesters will act autothermally. They actually heat themselves. And then the sludge is, it's thickened into a cake with what was just shown there, which is centrifuges. And then it becomes a disinfected soil product. And the digesters run at very high temperatures, 150 degrees. And the operators have done an excellent job getting them so they run without smelling. That was the biggest odor issue for the first 4 or 5 years of operation. And here's Dave bringing a little sample. Looks like dirt, actually. It smells like
I think they're
dirt.
going to be able to hear me now because I'm going to put that in my hands.
No smell.
Absolutely clean. Oh, it smells like Iowa dirt. Iowa dirt. Well, you know, there's so much humus in Iowa dirt. Isn't that great? That's what Iowa smells. Well, Dave, you just took that out of the truck that was underneath the room where it was being processed, right?
Correct.
And this is now the sludge from the plant, but it's not really, well, it's not anything like I would expect.
Well, it comes into the plant as proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. That's food, basically. That's most of the waste that goes into wastewater. And so after it goes through our type of digester, which is a very unusual digester, it's the only one in California. It's an thermophilic aerobic digester. And there's not another one in
Say that
California.
again?
Thermophilic aerobic digestion.
Okay. And it produces what's now Class A sludge.
Class A sludge.
Tell me what that means.
Class A sludge is sludge that has no restriction for reuse.
So I just had this on my hands.
Correct.
That's pretty impressive, and it has no smell whatsoever.
And it has virtually the absence of coliform.
So you're taking that right now, until the EPA gives us our clearance, you're taking that right now to Solano?
Most of it goes to Solano County for land spreading,
Okay.
land application. Yes.
And any other counties?
Merced County and I'm not sure. I forget the
Okay. So you're taking this for land applications, but ultimately what we want to do is basically sell it, right?
Correct. I mean, even if we were to give it away, we'd be ahead of the game. So, but we love to market it, and we have this flower industry just south of us. It's in the perfect marriage.
Absolutely.
A non-food crop, but this is not restricted for food crops. It could be used on food crops, but the idea is people don't like to use it for food crops
Because basically it's like fertilizer.
it's a great fertilizer.
Got a little white something in there, but it's just like fertilizer, and it has no smell whatsoever.
Yeah.
Dave, thank you so much, because what you're managing here, what you're in charge of, is completely different than the Sharp Park treatment plant. We have tertiary treatment, we have absolute sludge that can be used to produce all kinds of new foods. This is a great thing. Thank you very much. So that brings us back to you two, because you should be very proud of what we just looked at. Scott, I wanted to ask you, because we're going to focus to end this episode really on the restoration of Calera Creek. What's so special again about tertiary treatment and what we created here in Pacifica?
Well, it allows us to have two resources with the effluent. Before it was just discharged into the ocean, but now we have a water that's usable for recycling, and it also generated exciting habitat. It's one of the largest restorations in this part of the
You were telling
area.
me that it's even cleaner than tertiary treatment. Is that what you said?
Yes, it actually, we take two steps beyond that. We have nutrient removal, and that's one of the reasons we selected SBR's batch reactors. It removes phosphorus and nitrogen and gets it close to what the background levels would be in a normal stream. And Dave mentioned on the film that it's actually cleaner from a bacterial standpoint than the creek is by itself. And you can see in this picture, which shows how the creek was restored and constructed. It has natural meanders, and we planted over 150,000 1-gallon pots that were collected and grown in a nursery that was constructed in this end of the plant and also up on this upper ridge here.
The citizens really did that, yes?
We had about 200 volunteers that actually did quite a bit of the work, the planting and the growing of the plants.
Well, just to make sure we're all kind of clear, that creek that we just talked about up here, that's what this became. And if you look at this picture, this is what we're going to show you here at the end is those plants really grew. Scott, could you point out where the creek is now?
Yes, it's in this area, and it's about 300 feet across here, about 100 in this area, and it was imitated by something that you can pick up from the pictures that we showed last time, the 1861 surveys. It showed clumps of willows. We used a model that was developed by our biologists that's based on the geomorphics of 13 streams in San Mateo County. So it's a very close representation of what would have been there prior to European development.
So instead of a ditch, we actually have a very nice stream, fully restored, and we have a lot of native plants that have been placed there by citizens.
150,000. And
Okay.
we went from 3 frogs, red-legged frogs, to about 10,000.
Okay.
We went to 5 bird species to 110 bird species. So
Well,
diversity is great.
I've got to roll in
Sorry.
the last episode, the
I
last
just wanted to say,
clip.
Marion, in fact, very quickly, it was a long, tedious process. It took a lot of involvement, a lot of time, but there's a great deal of satisfaction knowing that we have something that's state-of-the-art and an ideal for the state of California.
Well, what you're looking at here in this, the viewers are seeing. Scott, could you tell us just a little bit about that? Because we're really talking about it, and here they're seeing it.
Yeah, but there's the discharge before it goes onto the beach. Again, it's water that's very similar to what you'd expect in a stream that would have been there prior to development. And it's a great resource biologically and also from a water reef standpoint.
Well, I know that this is a special project for you, and it did take a lot of work. Cal, you've done an amazing job, both being on council as well as being in charge of the Citizens Committee and former fire chief and all the other work. I want to thank you so much for bringing this to us tonight.
It was an effort of love.
Great. And I want to thank you, Scott, for joining us also again. And I want you to know that we have really enjoyed putting this together for everyone, all of us. And that's about all we have time for at this point. So I hope that this gives you some idea about wastewater treatment in Pacifica. I also want you to know that the Pacifica Historical Society is responsible for this, and you can always ask for more information or see more information at www.pacificahistory.org. Thank you for being with us tonight.
That didn't hurt much.
That was a good job. So.